Hello, everybody, and we are live. So thank you for joining me here on this live stream where I'm going to be painting something a little bit different this time around here on JStan Studio. Normally I'm painting some sort of a landscape on canvas or something like that, but this time I'm going to be painting what you see before you, which is an old toy of mine. It's an ABC robot from the Judge Dredd movie from 1995. So I had a collection of these toys from the movie, which to this day, I'm still not exactly sure that I ever saw it. I'm not exactly sure why I got these toys at one point. But there's all kinds from Judge Dredd to Judge Death, who I'm pretty sure was not actually in that movie. And then people like Mean Machine, Angel, and stuff. So I saw these sitting on my shelf the other day, and I thought, you know, this is a really great thing that I could give a paint job to that could really sing, something that was better than the original, and something that would be kind of fun along the way. So I wanted to give you just a brief overview in terms of what materials I'm using, and then jump into it and show you the actual process that I'll be using. So I've got a little overhead camera right here, so if you see that in the middle of the screen, that's what that is. And then I've got the actual piece here, and then my little palette here. So right now I have a lighter blue and a darker blue. I'll be using those in a big way for coverage, for kind of making my base coat. I want to have them in like a dark blue sort of a color with a little bit of metallic and some rust spots and stuff to make it look like this guy's seen some action. I've also got some red and some black. I'll use the red to make a couple of purples for my shadow colors, areas that are more recessed inside of the guy's chassis. And then the black just to kind of really accentuate some of the deep, dark shadows that are on him. Before I start, actually, this did not start black. It started off with its own paint scheme that was kind of similar to what you saw in the movie. In the movie, it was kind of like a dark, burnt red color. But what I did is I spray painted this with this guy here, Krylon Color Master Flat Black. So what that is it's just basically a spray paint. I found it at Hobby Lobby for like $5, and it's basically just a paint that you can put on to give you one solid layer of paint that's consistent across the board. And I found that those spray paints have a tendency to give you a pretty good layer to adhere paint to. So sometimes things that are plastic are kind of difficult to stick to. So having that layer of paint really helps you helps the paint stick to it and helps you get even coverage over everything. I prefer to start with black because the shadow colors are going to be darker than anything else on him. And when you have that dark color, everything else that's going to go over the top is going to look darker, and those recessed areas of shadow are already going to be dark for you. So you don't necessarily need to go in there and really noodle things that are down in the crevices without trying to touch the higher spots. That'll make a little bit more sense as we go along. So right now I'm just going to mix up a dark color of blue over here on my palette. If at any point things become, disheveled here and you can't see what I'm doing or something like that, feel free to drop a note in the chat so that I can readjust things here. I'm going to take a little bit of this dark blue color and place it over on a different spot on the palette. And to it, I'm going to add a little bit of red. So what it's going to do is I want to add a little bit of red because I still want it to be a very bluish purple. But that purple is going to kind of deceive the eye a little bit into creating sort of shadow colors on the character and on the figure itself. So I guess I'll start off with this purple color. And what I'm going to do is on this character, there's some areas that are raised where he's got like armor plating and stuff. And then on the inside here, there are some recesses where we have maybe some mechanics or pistons or something like that, or wiring. You see a couple of wires down through his legs and on his back. So those will be fine details that I'll add later. But in the recessed portions, this is where I want to add in that little bit of purple. Because what that's going to do is it's going to deceive the eye, like I said, into believing that it's seeing sort of shadowy shapes and that things are coming together the way that you would expect light to interact with a surface like this. So I'm not applying a ton of paint at this point. And the reason for that is especially with models where you have lots of details and crevices and pieces that are protruding, you don't in general want to use a lot of paint. At least that's not what I've found. If you start using a lot of paint, what tends to happen is things get a little bit muddied. And by that, I mean some of the details get filled in with this large glob of paint, and it's easier to work in the thinner layers of paint, at least in my experience. Your mileage may vary, but I definitely have observed that as I've been painting miniatures in the past. So in general, I try to stick with not very much paint on the brush. And I'm pretty comfortable painting robots at this point. So I may have mentioned it in previous live streams, but I got my start in art, really doing things more seriously in high school, playing a game called Warhammer 40,000, which was a game that me and a couple of fellow nerd friends played, which was, it's a tabletop war game. So you put together little models of futuristic soldiers and play a tabletop game with them. It involves some dice rolling. Your troops can kind of move around the battlefield, and basically you're trying to eliminate the enemy army on this futuristic battlefield setting. So it's a cool thing. And in that, I painted and played an army called the Necrons, which most of you probably don't know what that is. So I brought a couple of those guys to show you. So the Necrons were these sort of like soulless machine warriors. They kind of look like T-800s from the Terminator franchise. So I would play those and really enjoyed painting them a lot, painting these old dusty warriors. This one's painted up to look like a Minnesota Vikings color scheme, just for something fun. But that was really where I got my start. So painting these sort of machine warrior type things is, I've had a lot of experience doing that and had a lot of fun over the years doing it too. So like I said, it looks like I'm wandering a little bit there as I say that. Feel free to let me know in the chat if you have any questions, or if I start wandering with my props and the artwork here, that it's out of view at any point. So this is really just laying down the base layers of shadows that's going to kind of serve as the foundation for a lot of the other things that I'm going to do on this model. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get through this model in its entirety during this session. I'm planning to kind of go for 35, 40 minutes, something like that. And we'll see how far we can get. I really do hope that I'm able to make some good progress on this for you. So, as I mentioned in a previous live stream, I've been looking for jobs, looking for work recently, and all of a sudden I've been bombarded with phone interviews and phone screens. I had one earlier today, had one yesterday, had 3 last week, I think. So things have been going well in that regard. So I apologize if my voice is a little bit hoarse. I spent an hour talking on the phone earlier today. I've been talking a lot recently, which I'm not complaining about. It's nice to be in contact with people so that I'm not just kind of sending out applications out into the ether with no real knowledge of whether or not they're coming back. It's been really nice to be able to get that kind of feedback. And yeah, that's been going really well. So again, just still continuing to lay in these pieces. I mentioned before that the name of this character is an ABC warrior. So that was, Judge Dredd was originally a comic, which I've read a couple of issues of. Not very many, but was a book of Carlos Esquera, who was one of the main artists on the Judge Dredd comic. So I was reading a lot of his work in a book that I got from the library. A very talented artist who was really responsible for defining a lot of the look and the aesthetic of the Judge Dredd universe. So the ABC robots, ABC standard for atomic, bacterial, and chemical. So there were these robots that were designed to go out into this horrible future wasteland, war zone, basically, and fight wars, basically. So in the movie, they combined the ABC Warriors, which were like, I don't remember if it was 7 or 8 of them, combine them all into one character, which is this guy that you see before you, or rather that you didn't see before you. Sorry about me drifting off camera. You notice that I switched to the slightly lighter color of blue. So I'm going in there and trying to hit fewer of the darker recessed areas because I want those to kind of stick around and speak for themselves, be those shadow areas to kind of further define things. And I'm going in on some of the places like the head and the face, especially some of these armor plates. I'm going to especially hit these armor plates with a layer of silver paint later so that they really sparkle and shine. I really think that that'll pull the model together and really make things look great at the end. So again, just going over some of these armor plating pieces. And as I'm doing this, I'm kind of trying to think about where the light is going to hit. So especially these upper like breastplate sort of things, I'm figuring that the light is going to be really shining very distinctly on those. So I want to make sure that those are a little bit brighter than some of the other spots. I'm aided a little bit by the fact that this is a 3-dimensional model, and the lighting that is in the room where this is sitting is going to have an effect and cast shadows where they ought to be cast on this thing. But I also want to really draw and accentuate a lot of the darker shadow areas by keeping in mind how I'm painting and where I'm putting the bright spots of paint, where I'm putting the dark spots of paint, areas that I'm leaving unpainted so that you can see the full strength of the black shine through. So again, these shoulder pads that I'm working on are going to be largely in the sun if this were being lit by the sun on some battlefield or something like that. So I'm going to make sure that those are some of the brighter regions. And when I'm painting this, I'm really thinking about painting in layers. I'm not necessarily trying to rush through and hit this all in one go. I really want this to have a layered look, and especially because this is supposed to be a war machine, I don't want the paint job to look pristine. I want there to be some spots where you see dust, and I don't know if you can tell in the model here, but there's actually a molded bullet hole or something like that on this shoulder pad. I want to let that shine through so that it does give the impression that this guy has seen some action and he's battle damaged or something like that. I'll move in and paint some of these upper support struts here on his shoulders. I've probably mentioned this on other streams, but I'm an engineer by trade, so machines and robots and stuff where you can see pistons and different actuators and stuff, that stuff always interests me. So I've always been kind of into the killer robot aesthetic, I guess. Maybe that helps a little bit in some regards when I'm painting these things, that I can kind of think what the functional purpose of some of these tubes and trays and other mechanical bits might be. Certainly makes it fun for me to paint. And definitely, if you're out there watching and you have a question about something that I'm doing or anything like that, or you just want to chat about something, feel free to throw it up over in the chat over there. Or over there, whichever it might be. So paint a little bit down the hands and the arms. I want the color scheme on this guy to be very dark still. And I think there's a little bit of a reflection from some of the lights that I have here in the studio. So it might come across as looking a little bit brighter than it actually is and that I'm intending. So I apologize for that if it's not quite looking quite right and you're looking at it thinking, wow, this guy's really like a blueberry. It's coming across pretty nicely here in person. Paint some of these pistons down on his lower body and kind of this pelvis area. A lot of times, maybe I should, but I don't really follow a set pattern in how I'm painting things. A lot of times I have a tendency to kind of jump around and so forth. It's just how I work, how I have kind of learned over the years to work and the habits that I've made. So maybe it's, like I said, not exactly the best thing, but it is how I tend to work, and it's worked for me. Feels natural, which I prefer to work in ways that feel natural rather than following a set system too rigidly. Go on this shoulder pad a little bit. I'm running out of this darker color, so I might mix up a little bit more before this ends up becoming a little bit too bright on me for what I'm trying to do right now. Get this arm, get some of these panels that almost look like muscles, because those are going to catch a lot of the light. I'm going to grab a little bit more of that dark color as long as I have it handy. So this paint is cobalt blue hue. It's a thick body acrylic paint from Hobby Lobby. It's the Master's Touch brand that they have. I would ordinarily not recommend using thick body acrylic paints for this kind of thing. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned before, when you're dealing with a three-dimensional model, you don't want to booger it up. You want to keep those details in there that are a part of the model itself. You really want the different recesses, and like in here you got some hoses and so forth. You really want those pieces of the model to shine. And when you're using a thick body acrylic, the paint itself is quite thick and will fill in a lot of your recessed areas. And if you're not careful, it'll destroy some of your detail. I say this and I'm displaying sheer hubris because this is the first time that I'm actually using that on a model, but it's working pretty well for me so far. And I've worked with acrylic paint enough that I have a pretty comfortable feel with it, and I'm controlling it by using a more liquidy light blue paint. So it's not behaving too poorly for me at this point. I'm able to kind of mitigate whatever weirdness might happen from the thick of the dark blue paint. So I'm glad to see that. And I just really like the color of this cobalt blue hue. It's quickly becoming one of my favorite paint colors. Used it in skies for landscapes, in water for rivers or ponds or something like that. Sorry, I'm drifting on you again. It's really nice when you've got a green field or something like that. It's really nice to put in blue flowers as well. I think that kind of pops with a shade of blue that's really distinct and vibrant. Very saturated shade of blue. I just think that pops really nicely for you inside of a deep green field or something like that. All right. So I think I'm pretty happy with the upper body, the way that it stands now. As I just put a fingerprint in there, I'll just brush that out. So I'm going to move on to the lower body. And I think what I'm going to do is, I think that this layer of paint, this dark blue, is going to be mostly sufficient for coverage. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is go back with that light shade of blue and then throw down some very scant highlights. I want this to be dark blue. Maybe it's like a stealth robot or something like that. When you've got stealth, I think that it works best to use really dark shades of like green and blue, because I just think that looks more proper. If you start throwing in too much black, it sort of looks muddy and over the top. And I think in real life too, it probably wouldn't look very good if you had a ninja or something who was all in black, because nothing really is all in black like that. I think it would kind of stand out against a barn or something at night. I don't think that would look particularly good. So I think that having a dark shade of blue, I like having the metallic paints. That's something that I it's a trademark of mine, something that I try to incorporate in pretty much everything that I do, just because I really like the way that it shimmers, the way that it looks. Gives it a nice look that kind of draws everything together visually. Also suggests texture and material as well. I think when people see sort of a metallic silvery paint, they think, oh, it's metal. It's very clear. It's sort of like a visual shorthand to get people to where you want them to be thinking what you're thinking. Go in with a little bit more, thin it out a little bit with the lighter blue paint. Come in here for this stuff. One thing that I'm noticing that's interesting about this, using the heavy body acrylic paint, it is not drying as fast as I'm anticipating. So you see me with some junk on my fingers here and there. So there's probably a couple of little fingerprints that I'm going to have to touch up here and there. But that's something that's interesting. It's a learning experience. If I had to guess, I would say that because it's thicker, it has, these are all water-based acrylic paints. So I'm thinking that there's a little bit less water and a little bit more pigment, so the water doesn't evaporate quite as quickly. If I had to guess, that would be what I would say is happening. It's an interesting thing to keep in mind when I do future painting like this. I try not to fret too much over things like that. I enjoy kind of problem solving on the fly. To me, that's one of the most fun things about art or about painting or drawing, is kind of, as you go along, pieces don't go as planned. There's something that goes a little bit awry, and you kind of just problem solve your way through it. To me, that's super fun, because you're live streaming and watching this with me. Maybe you're watching after the fact. If that's the case, welcome. But nobody has to see this thing outside of you guys. And if things go completely awry, I'll just throw it away, or I'll repaint over it and try again. I think that that's something that holds a lot of people back when it comes to art. They think that they have to get it perfect the first time. And I guess I've been blessed in a certain respect that I've never really had that. I try not to, put complete garbage out there for you guys to watch. I try to make it, high a quality as I can, of course. But if things don't work out the way that I intended them to, I'm not that mad. I can always try again. I can always buy another canvas. If I were, doing the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel or something like that, and the Pope's looking over my shoulder, and I, accidentally give somebody a 2-foot-long nose or something like that, then it's a problem. But for this, might as well just start over and try again. I'm going into a little bit lighter of the blue now, and I'm kind of picking out a couple of spots where I want there to be particular highlights. That's going on that upper breastplate portion. Quick just side note about something that I'm thinking about. The upper portion of this breastplate kind of comes along his shoulder and down the front, and then there's a sharp angle back towards the sort of middle of his torso. And something that I'm thinking about here is I'm going to paint the upper portion of this breastplate with a brighter color than the bottom portion. And again, that's just to accentuate the shadows that will naturally occur if this were really on a battlefield in a 3-dimensional space with, the sun overhead or something like that. And I mean, the reason that happens is just because most of the time when you're dealing with lighting, especially in an outdoor environment, the sun is overhead for you. So I'm thinking that the light is coming this way on him. This surface is going to be quite a bit brighter than the bottom surface. And that highlight just serves to accentuate that a little bit and bring it into better focus. Now, because this is kind of designed to be an old combat robot that might be a little bit dusty and rusty, again, I'm not super worried about making this paint job pristine. I'm not concerned about making everything look flat. In fact, I think that it looks a little bit better if it doesn't look flat, if it looks like maybe there are some flecks of dust or bits of rust or something like that. We're actually going to add some rust a little bit later if we have time. And I'll show you my method for that as well. Just putting a couple little splotches here on the shoulder pads, going a little bit on the bicep and this little forearm plate that he's got here. I try to just very lightly with the highlight dust over some of these raised pieces on these mechanical parts. And the reason that I do that is just to give some visual interest. When you give that, it appears like there's more layers, like there's better texture on this, and it really serves to accentuate the pieces that are sticking out. Like here, there's a couple of vents on his back. I'm not sure how well in focus that is for you, but if I just lightly brush over the top, what's going to happen is the raised portions of the model are going to pull off tiny little bits of bright paint, and it's going to adhere to those raised portions and those raised portions only. So it's a neat technique, something called dry brushing. A lot of times you just see it where somebody will dabs the paintbrush into some paint. They'll brush off their paintbrush on a paper towel or something like that to leave a very small amount of paint. And what that does is it's just the raised portions as you go over the top surface that are going to grab the paint off your brush. There's not enough paint to actually fill in a location for you, but there is enough to really accentuate those high portions. And it makes it quick and easy to create a color scheme that looks convincing and detailed and a little bit dusty and rusty, which is what I'm going for. Just grab a couple pieces of this arm again. And then I'll come down here to the feet. The feet should really look kind of dusty and craggy and very, very beat up. These are the things that are going to be stomping over either rocky terrain or, dusty areas. Maybe this thing stepped on a landmine or two as things have gone on. That's really, I don't want to be super clean here, especially. Put a little bit more on this portion, a little bit more on this torso piece. And I'll stick a little teeny tiny bit of this bright color inside of these deep recessed portions. Maybe there's some sort of a power source or something in there that might be creating a little bit of light that would be coming off. So at this point, it doesn't really look like much. There's quite a bit of light reflecting off of some of these shiny pieces that might still be a little bit wet. So it probably looks a little bit brighter for you than it does for me, which is all right. So now what I'm going to do is over the top of all of this, I'm going to dry brush on a layer of silver. And the reason that I'm going to do that is to give it sort of a metallic look and kind of give it that impression that this thing has seen some action. It's been beat up over the course of years. And using the dry brush technique is, I think, perfect for this kind of thing because, again, you really notice that silver in the areas where there's high points on the model itself, which is what you'd expect. And what's going to visually look proper. Sorry, I'm almost out of silver paint. There we go. I don't need much for this guy, but a little dab will be good. For this sort of dry brushing where I'm going over the entire surface of the model, I'm going to use a pretty big brush. This is a round brush with stiffer bristles. This is a number 6 brush. So I'm going to dab my way into a little bit of silver. I've got a handy dandy paper towel over here. So I'll just brush out most of the paint so you can see a little bit of silver on the edge of that brush. There's not much actually coming off on the paper towel though. And as I go over the top, what you'll see is a little bit of metallic being left, particularly on those raised portions, which is exactly the look that I'm going for. Sort of a hidden bonus, this stiffer bristle brush is going to lift off and kind of scratch and score some of the other paint that's not fully dry yet, which is something that produces kind of a cool effect, I think. That paint is going to scratch its way off and be a little bit scored. So what's going to happen is it's going to reveal that black color below, which is makes for a neat effect. So it's going to just basically rough it up overall. Got some highlights on the head and the face. I really want to make sure not to overdo it on the head and the face, but I want those highlights to be stark. So I am being a little bit more fussy in that area than I would be in some of the others. Putting some of these on the arm plates now. Putting some of these on the back details. This is like a timing chain sort of a thing that's on the model here. And I'm thinking eventually what I'm going to do is make that into sort of like a rusty bronze color. Make it look like maybe it's some sort of foreign alloy or something that's part of the power drive system of this thing, part of the powertrain. I think that that could produce a cool look. And I think the color of bronze would really stand out starkly against this guy who's kind of a stealthy blue color. I think, I'm saying stealthy, but as this is coming together, I almost think that he looks more like an Arctic type of trooper, like something that you would see. Maybe he was fighting in like Russia or Finland during the winter or something like that. Or, I mean, in the Judge Dredd universe, maybe it was like a nuclear winter or something like that. I suppose that could be. It's kind of a cool little backstory for this guy. I was never a big fan of Judge Dredd. I started reading some stories lately that have been kind of piqued my interest. I mentioned the Carlos Esquerra book at the library, which had quite a few of the most famous Judge Dredd storylines, like the Apocalypse War and some of the others. So it was cool to. It's in a different style than a lot of the American comic books that I've read. So in that respect, it was an interesting read. And from an art perspective, I think that Esquerra's work is really quite good. Especially, I preferred the work that they put in there for the time that he was in color. I'm not sure who the colorist was for him, if he was involved in that or if there was a separate colorist. But I really think that those bits of art really popped. It's a fun read. Interesting to me, too, that the Judge Dredd universe takes place in real time. So they started off that comic strip in the 70s at some point. I don't remember what year it was exactly. So if somebody knows that in the chat, they can feel free to throw that up there. Oh, thank you for the compliment about the silver. Appreciate that. But they started the comic strip in the 70s, and it's been proceeding in real time. So what that means is that the characters started off being like 20 or 30-year-olds, and now they're like, some of these characters have been with the series for the entire time are now like 70. So they've started to kind of tweak the writing, saying that people have gone through, like gene rejuvenation therapy and some sort of, sci-fi gobbledygook and stuff to try to keep these characters in there. So it's kind of an interesting premise to keep that character aging in real time with the book. I'm sure that it produces some interesting writing challenges as you're going along. All right, what else have we got? So I'm pretty happy with the way that this blue silvery color looks. What I'm going to start doing now is adding a little bit of detail. So I'm going to start off by adding some red to the eyes. I'm going to try to give them like a glowing red sort of a look on those. So I'm going to come in here with a fine detail brush. This is a 10-0 brush. Wow, I've never used this before. This is interesting. I say that a lot during live streams, that I've never tried things before. And to be honest, that's one of the things that I enjoy the most about live streams. It gives me an opportunity to experiment a little bit to try some new techniques and new pieces. Because as I said before, if I'm not happy with something, I'll just throw it away or repaint it or something. So that gives it a nice ominous look, because if this guy is a war machine as he's supposed to be, he should look ominous. What I'm doing now is I'm painting a really thin red line on the bottom and the top. So basically his eye socket, basically lining that with a very, very thin layer of red to make it look like it's glowing. And I'm going to put a little bit on the bridge of his nose too. Eventually what I'll do is I'll go in with some very bright highlight there, so probably like a white or something like that. And I will put a little dot in each eye to really sell the fact that this is something that's glowing red and very menacing and terrifying. I made a little bit of a mistake, so I just corrected it really quick with a little bit of black. I got too much red on the side of his eye socket there, so it looked like he just kind of had one eye that was kind of like Picassoing out of his face. So I fixed that with a little bit of black there, which is something that I really enjoy about art and painting. It's quick and easy to fix most of your mistakes. Not all, but most. From here on out, I like the way that this is looking. I'll go in and I'm just going to add in a couple of little streaks of black to really define like where we are right here. I'm defining this bicep plate that he's got, making it look like he's pumping a little bit of iron, working out. He's been eating his Wheaties and getting strong. I was just to add in a little bit more of the definition than I might have lost and when I was a little bit too aggressive with the other layers of paint, which is not bad. You know, I'm coming in and assessing the model now that I'm a little bit closer to completion. And I'll actually do this a little bit later now that I think about it, because I want to show you what I normally do for spots of rust. Here's what I'll do. I'll be right back. Needed to grab a little bit of brown paint. And what I normally do for rust, rusty colors and so forth, is I'll go a layer of brown, a layer of red, and then a layer of silver over the top. And you're sitting there thinking, why those colors? Well, when you're thinking of rust, it's very sort of amorphous, and it doesn't necessarily follow particular patterns. It tends to be lumpy and irregular. Some areas are more brownish, some areas are more reddish. So what I found that I try to do is when I'm painting a rusty spot, like on this guy's shoulder pad, for example, I'll put down a little bit of brown. And the acrylic paints that I'm using have a tendency to be a little bit transparent, which is good, because I don't want this to be like he has a smear of chocolate across his shoulder pad. That's not, you want your war machines to be intimidating. Smears of chocolate, not intimidating at all. So you want to grab a little bit of brown that's a little bit transparent, shows a little bit of the color below it. Also because the rust is a part of the armor plate. You know, it's not some lump that's on top of it. You want it to be integrated in with the piece itself. While that brown paint is still a little bit wet, I'm going to take a little dab of red paint, and I'm not even going to bother cleaning my brush. I'm actually going to knock a little bit of that red paint off because I don't want it to be hot rod red necessarily. I'm just going to kind of mix it in with that. So there's going to be a little bit of brown in some spots, a little bit of red in other spots. Because it was still a little bit wet when I did that, it's going to kind of come together a little bit better for me. So that gives us some brown and some red. And then finally, I'll top it off with a little bit of silver over the top. Just like that. And what I'll do is I'll just take my finger and kind of rub it over some of the edges to remove some of this paint. But all in all, you get a nice little suggestion of a rust spot. For me, I don't really want my rust spots to look super well defined and like, bam, rustiness. I kind of want it to blend in with the rest of the model itself. So I'll go down here on one of the leg panels and do the same sort of technique. A little bit of brown, not too much red, like that. And then grab a little bit of silver up here, dab that into position. It's a little bit too much silver, but that's okay. Just like that. And I'll do that especially on the feet as well. As I said, those should be the most messed up, gnarly, dirty spots on this robot. Just marching through muck and sand and snow and sleet. So I'll go in for a little bit more red. That was a place that I already did, so don't need more red there. That was a mistake on my part, but we're all good. A little bit of red. Yeah, we got everything. Cool. And then we'll go in for the silver once more. A little bit here, a little bit here, 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 and there. And I'll just dab these spots to kind of dial them back a little bit. And there, we've got some rust. And I don't want to overdo that because it's very easy to start thinking, oh, one rust spot kind of looks cool. How about if I do 12? And then you're like, oh my gosh, this guy's totally, he's a 1960s car that hasn't been well kept. You don't really want that. You don't want him to look like he's got, like leprosy or something. You just want him to have a little bit of rust that looks right. At this point, what I'm going to do is focus on details. So like I said before, I'll go in with some black paint. I'll kind of come into some of these recessed areas to make them just pop and further define them. And then what I'll do is, especially on some of these cords and cables and stuff, I'm going to add some other maybe contrasting colors. So maybe some reds, some greens, some yellows, stuff that makes them look like electrical wiring. And there's an especially large wire I saw that was running through his leg here. What I'm thinking of doing there is painting a base coat of green and then mixing in a little bit of bright yellow in with that green. So it almost looks like maybe there's some sort of alien sci-fi fluid that's pumping through this hose. Maybe it's something that, some sort of biomechanical fluid that helps him heal or something like that, or repair himself. That's really what I would go for there. As I said, I'll go for the sort of antique-y brass bronzy look on this back timing chain sort of looking piece. There's a gun over here, so I'll probably pick that out with some bronze as well, or something that makes it visually distinct from the rest of what's going on. Maybe I'd put a blood stain on his fist or something like that, because he's supposed to be some big bad soldier dude. But really, that's kind of where things are going to go from here. I see that I'm a little bit over 40 minutes at this point, so I should be heading out. But I really appreciate everybody taking the time to join the stream today. I hope you learned something. I hope that it was fun to watch and kind of just hear me ramble on about everything under the sun, from rust spots to stealth robots that fight on Arctic battlefields. So I do have one quick update for you, and I'll put it in the description after that. I'm going to be doing my first show very soon, so that's something that I'm very excited about. I'll be over at Apache Mall in Rochester, Minnesota, near where I live. So I'll be selling some artwork there. Some paintings will be available for that. So available for purchase. I'll post some more updates to Instagram and Facebook as the time comes. I'll post this guy once he's complete to the Facebook and Instagram pages, so feel free to like and follow me there. I post most of my updates on those pages, and I like to come on here and do live streams with you every now and then as well, or other videos. So feel free to subscribe here as well. Please feel free to give the video a like if you enjoy what I'm doing. It helps the video out and helps the channel out. So I appreciate that. There's a couple links down below to all of my social pages. Feel free to, like I said, go follow those. Hope you enjoy the work that I'm doing, and thanks for following along with me. Yep, and until next time, I'll see you then. God bless. Happy painting.